Hello again, welcome to Irinka's Kitchen. This is my second video, and what I'd like to do today is talk to you about beef stew that of course was passed down from my family, from my grandmother to my mother, and this was a very popular dish in our house, especially when we had many guests coming. It can be cooked for up to 20 people if you wanted to. If you look at my recipe on site, it shows for probably approximately 4 people, but today I'm going to double the recipe, and I'm going to show you how to prepare this wonderful dish, this beef stew dish, and it's also called PÖRKÖLT in Hungarian, and it can be frozen in Ziploc containers, and it can be put into the freezer, and it can be taken to work, and it can be portion sized for a family of 4, so it can be frozen into larger Ziploc containers, and then you can put it into the freezer and warm it up and add some pasta and rice to it. So it's a fantastic dish. So I'm happy to have you again in my kitchen, and I'm going to get started with this great recipe, beef stew. So I'm going to move over to the counter here. And I prepared all the ingredients, and one of the ingredients that I use is diced onions. So what I've done is I've doubled the recipe into two onions rather than 1 onion. So I'm going to add that to my roasting pot, and of course get my wooden spoon out here and get this ready and prepared. So this is preparation for the meat. So we want to put the diced onions on the bottom, and we want to make sort of like push the onions to the side and make sort of like a little place for the beef when you put it in there. And then I've got some diced tomatoes, so I've doubled the quantity for that. My recipe calls for 1 tomato, so I've doubled that to 2 tomatoes. You can add 3 or 4 if you want. If you really love to add tomatoes, you could add 4 tomatoes to this recipe. Then what I've done is I've done a variation. I had some leftover bell peppers, some yellow and orange and red peppers. So I'm going to put that all into the bottom of the pan, ready for the meat. So I'm going to add that to the bottom of the pan, and then I'm going to add my beef. And I've already cut up bite-sized beef, and this is sirloin tip roast. So I bought some roast. I got it at a great price at a store that I go shopping to, and it's about 1 kilogram. So my recipe calls for 1 kilogram of stewing beef. I have 2 kilograms of stewing beef here. And this will actually be, I will place this into frozen Ziploc containers for my husband and I, so that we can pull it out when we come home from busy days of work, and we can heat it in the microwave, and then we can cook rice up with it, we can do mashed potatoes with it, so it's ready. It's the main meal is ready to go. So I'm going to be adding this to all of this meat to all of the ingredients that I've put into the roasting pan. And I'm going to stir this up, stir all of these ingredients up together, make sure that all the onions and peppers are all mixed together with the beef. So this is a great dish for when you're expecting a lot of company. This would probably serve about between 5 to 8 people, and it's great with rice, pasta, mashed potatoes. My grandmother would cook this up for her family. She would, of course, use less meat, because back in the war, food was rationed, so she would use probably 1/2 kilogram of meat if she could get a hold of meat, but probably not the sirloin tip beef meat. You could use any other cuts of meat if you wanted to. You could marinate, cheaper cuts of meat into some cooking wine, because it's really a good way to make the meat more tender. But I use sirloin tip roast. I buy a sirloin tip roast, and my husband actually helped me cut up the cuts of meat for this presentation. But we cut them up into bite-sized pieces, and they shrink a bit as you're cooking them, so they're actually a nice size for eating. And so after I've got all these ingredients put into the roasting pan, I have some spices that I add to this. I add, according to my recipe, add 2.5 teaspoons of salt, and I use a sea salt recipe, so I use 2.5 teaspoons of salt. And then some black pepper and 1/2 teaspoon, so I'm going to double that. I'm just kind of approximately measuring here. My grandmother, she would never use measuring spoons, so she would use the palm of her hand and measure in the palm of her hand to do measuring. So when I sat and we talked about the measurements, she would kind of use the palm of her hand to measure. So we approximately kind of figured out that that's what the measurements were. If you like more pepper in it, you can add more pepper in it, and if you like it more salty, you can add that, or depending on the type of diet that you have, you can add less salt. And then of course I have here some paprika. I have 4 tablespoons of paprika because I've doubled the recipe. According to my recipe on the site, it says 2 tablespoons. So I've got 4 tablespoons of Hungarian szeged paprika, and it's not the hot one. It's a sweet paprika. So if you like to have a recipe that calls for hot pepper in it, then you could do it that way. If you like that type of recipe, you can vary it. But if you're serving it for children or younger guests, then you'd want to probably use the sweet paprika. So I kind of just mix this around and make sure that all the spices are mixed together with the ingredients. And then of course I have some ketchup according to my recipe. And in my recipe, I call for 1/2 cup of ketchup. I've got a cup of ketchup that I add to my recipe. And this is something that my mother, she adds a lot of, she adds ketchup to her recipe. According to the Hungarian recipe, they wouldn't add ketchup, they would add more tomatoes. But this version, I've added kind of ketchup to it. It gives it a nice flavor to it. It gives it some makes it moist. So, and then I just stir this around well, making sure that all the ketchup is sort of covering the meat and the ingredients. And then I add some oil, some olive oil. So in my recipe I call for a 1/4 cup, so I double that. So everything is doubled. So, and then I kind of spread it around. This also gives it a little more moisture, because you don't want your meat to be dried out. Then I make sure to stir this around thoroughly so that the oil gets distributed in the ingredients. This goes well with a red wine, dark red wine. It's It's fantastic for that. Okay, and the next step is to add 4 cups of water. I've doubled that in the recipe. The recipe calls for 2 cups of water, so I will put 4 cups of water onto this. And stir it around. Stir all the ingredients around in it. And then what I do is I put it into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and I usually cover the roasting pan. And then near the end, I take the cover off, and just to kind of sort of brown the top of the meat, to make the meat brown, the last probably 15 minutes, I take the cover off the roasting pan. And it already smells just great with this. We can smell the spices and the onions, and it's already smelling fantastic. So then I put it into an oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So this would cook for about an hour and a half. So midway, I would check on it, make sure that there's enough water on it. I've actually used less than 4 cups, so probably about 3.5 cups. So, but if you need to add more water, you can just kind of check on it midway and see if you need more water add more water to it. Hello, I'm back again in the kitchen, and the beef stew is ready to be taken out of the oven. And so it's been cooking for about an hour and a half, so it's ready to come out of the oven. Okay, and I'm going to turn the oven off. And it is ready to be taken out of the oven, and it smells just great now. So it's been in the oven for about an hour and 30 minutes, and halfway I've checked it to make sure that there's enough water on the bottom of the roasting pan, and it looks just fantastic. It is amazing. So what I would do is I would let it cool down, and then I would portion size it into some Ziploc containers, and then I would freeze it, put it into the freezer, and enough for both my husband and myself, and so it'd be a meal ready for us to eat. Served with, as I mentioned, rice, potatoes, pasta. So it's great with that. Or if you want, you can put it over some bread. You know, some of your favorite bread. You can buy loaves of bread and then cut it into slices and then just pour it over some bread. So it's great that way too. So this is my finished product, and I will just kind of show you here as to what it looks like. And it is amazing. It's an amazing recipe, tasty recipe. This is basically what it looks like. There's a lot of juice on it, so it's great because you can portion size it into your Ziploc containers, and it keeps it moist. So I'm happy to have had you in my kitchen again, and I hope to see you again in my next video. And you can contact me at irene@irenkaskitchen.com. That would be my email address, and also my website is irenkaskitchen.com. And until next time, bon appetit, jó étvágyat, good appetite, and we'll see you again